This is a Let's Talk Church Safety and Security microsode with your host, Paul Buckner. Hey sheepdogs, so let's talk about some special concerns that you can have with your congregation. I believe I talked about this at one point. I talked about it recently when talking to a church about church safety, and I want to talk about foster children, fostering or adopting children within your church, which is phenomenal and it's awesome. But there's actually some unique concerns that come with that. So I'll take two steps back. As of the recording of this video, it is the Saturday before I am going to be starting the police academy. And so I had to shave the beard. So fear the beard. Anyway, so the beard is gone, and come Monday morning bright and early, the stubble will be gone, and I will be pre-adolescent, no facial hair, smooth, whatever. So that's going to be a fun adventure for about 4 months. So talking about foster children, foster care, and talking about adopting, there's actually some unique concerns that come with this, and it kind of goes across a spectrum. So first off, I want to say I've got friends and family that are amazing people, and they foster. So I have nothing but respect for them, and some of them foster an enormous number of children, and it can be so heartbreaking and strenuous. There's unique concerns that it adds to it. Not every church is equipped for it. So I've got several friends that foster, loved ones that foster, and they reach out to me with concerns and prayer requests and things of the like. And so one of the things that you can have as a concern is, so let's talk about fostering and adoption. You may end up in a situation more with fostering than with adoption, where there may be non-custodial parties involved, and you sometimes get some weird things where maybe somebody in the family has lost full custody. They don't have any kind of custody of their child, and they're going to show up. So we're pretty familiar with that already. That's pretty basic stuff. No surprises. But if you're not involved in these folks' lives, i.e., hey, my name's Paul, I'm part of the security team here at the church, Pastor so-and-so asked me to reach out to you and let you know if there's any concerns that you have when it comes to your kiddos. Let us know, non-custodial parents, somebody that might be trying to cause a problem there, or whether it's that, or if there's special health concerns. There was a little girl, and a lot of times because of abuse and neglect, children can have, and unfortunately because of drug abuse, children can have any number of different disorders, whether it's congenital, whether it's a short-term thing. They can have nutrition issues, they can have very interesting allergies. And so we had a young lady at a church that I served in a security capacity with, and they had a situation where she actually had to have an inhaler that went completely over her mouth and nose, and she had some very unique scarring because of that. And we actually had an inhaler set up at the church at all times, and as the packet got close to expiration, they would switch it out. And the lady, her adoptive mother, just absolutely loved the fact that we were there to help in any way. And she actually had at least one attack at church, and everybody was all about it. So we had a couple of nurses and some folks that were qualified to help, and mom got involved. Easy peasy. Once we knew and could get ahead of it, it was not a big deal. If we could not have, it actually was life-threatening. And so that was a huge thing. So whether it's an EpiPen, and that extends to just beyond that, like reaching out with concerns and saying, hey, if your child has a special concern, and we all know about things like the nut allergy or whatever, but there's a number of things that can be quite unique. Some children, they're playing outside and they're hypersensitive to a wasp or bee sting, and you need to know that. So that's a thing. And but then going back to the fostering, a lot of times there can be terrible abuse that happened to a child that's in foster care. A lot of times they're taken away for sometimes I've seen things where they should not have been removed from the home, not at all. But then you end up with situations where it was much needed, and mom and dad should not have custody anymore. I knew of through an officer, he told me about a young man that had a broken leg. He was about 2 years old, and he said he had a compound fracture, broken leg. Literally the bone was sticking through the side of his leg, and he had not bled to death. And he said we rescued him from that environment. And he said Dad is headed to federal prison because of some things that were going on. And I believe that's correct. It was federal prison that he was headed to. And then the dad has lost permanent rights to the child, and now the child, young and cute, and can go into the adoption process and be adopted by a family that will actually love and take care of him. That child got a second lease on life because of that officer and the drug raid that happened at that house. Well, then that's the side of it that I see stuff on. And then the child gets into a church environment, and there just may be unique concerns. The child may have aspects that they act out in. The child may have aspects where maybe they can't be left alone. There's a Christian school that I know of that they actually had to expel a boy. He was expelled from the school system, and this parochial school, this Christian school specifically took him in. And when they did, they took the young man in, and he actually tried to set fire to the building twice. And by the grace of God, he was caught both times. And I was talking to one of the staff members who was like, "Hey, I need advice." And I said, you cannot take care of this child. And they were not equipped for it. They did not have the staffing for it. They didn't have camera systems. They didn't have somebody that could be with this child at all times. He's one of God's creation, and he needs Jesus, but this young man was extremely dangerous. He was a danger to himself and others. And so, what a mess. What a mess. And so going 2 steps back, that's a very real concern for a church. Imagine that little Tommy, he is known for trying to start fires. You kind of need to know that. Imagine little Tommy is violent, and he's being stuck into an environment where, unfortunately, the only experience he has is violence. I had a boy attack me one night, and fortunately for me, he telegraphed his move. But there was a ramp up the side of the church, and he took off running and jumped over the side of the ramp, and he like a Superman jump, and he stuck his knee out to hit me in the face. And he was a teenager. He was, 15, something like that, somewhere in that age. It's been a long time ago. And by the grace of God, he telegraphed his move by yelling. And I looked up, and I was able to brush his knee to the side, and I pivoted with him. And as he went past me, I literally put him into a chokehold. And I brought him to the ground, just bumped his knees and took him straight to the ground, and was holding him not hard enough to choke him out, but it was a restraint move. And it just happened. That's just what I went to. And so coming around from that, I'm yelling for other youth leaders, and they got over there, and they're like, "Why in the world would you do that?" Because he yelled, and they saw him launch himself at me. And I'm not a little guy, but there are people way bigger than me. And so what ended up happening was the different youth leaders were like, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "My dad and my brother always taught me that you find the biggest guy at a new place that you go, and you kick his butt, and then everybody will be afraid of you." What an amazing raising. And here's the sad thing. I've actually dealt with that young man now in a capacity as a chaplain, where he's been to prison more than once. And it's just a terrible situation. It's a heartbreaking situation. And I've seen him just get absolutely ridiculous. I've seen him have to be physically restrained in a hospital, where he got sideways and got extremely vulgar with the nurse that was in charge of that area. And he was going into the psych ward, and he got stupid, and he ended up basically gagged and bagged. And man, does he need Jesus. But sometimes with foster situations, you can have terrible, terrible situations that arise. And I remember one day, way before this, I was dropping him off, and I needed to talk to the family, and the dog bit me. I mean, this was a rough family, and just a terrible situation that this kid came from. That can be something you see with foster care, where you can't let little Tommy be alone in his classroom without supervision because of Tommy's violent tendencies. Then I'm going to talk about a terrible situation, and I've talked about this before, but it really needs to be unpacked and talked about, and that is that sometimes kids deal with terrible sexual abuse. And one of the things I work with in a lot of ministry with being a chaplain is I see the aftermath of that, or I talk to officers that maybe suffered from it, and now as adults they're dealing with the scars and sometimes the open infected emotional wounds that are still there. It's just awful. And so foster care, unfortunately, some of these kids have seen terrible things. And I literally know kids that they were in foster care and they were molested or sexually assaulted by other foster care children. Wow. Literally where they were like, you had a great childhood compared to me. I'm going to hurt you so you're just like me. It's a repeated abuse, and it's terrible, and it's awful, and shameful. But I knew of a situation where a church had approached me and said, hey, and this is awful, but they said, hey, you need to talk to Pastor so-and-so, and our security team is trying to figure out how to deal with this. And there's a girl that is in our church that she's a recent addition to our church body, and she's in foster care, and she's an adult now. And so back then, no. And so she had been very, very badly abused for years, and so her normal was abuse. And so she was repeating that pattern of abuse and thought it was normal. Her normal was abuse. I am blessed. I did not grow up like that. I had a lot of things happen to me as a kid, but I didn't have that happen. And so I worked with the team to get an individual on the security team assigned to watch her, where at all times, unless she was in the bathroom, there was no opportunity in which she could be alone with another child. And there was a lot of ministry that was done. And the foster dad talked to me at length about the situation. And so at no point was she allowed to be alone with a child. And she tried multiple times. This is what's terrifying, is if she didn't get this under control, she is now going to repeat that pattern of abuse as an adult. Now, this is rubber meets the road stuff. This is sobering, oh my word, terrible truths of sin and patterns of sin being repeated. Outside of Christ, that's not going to stop. Outside of quality counseling, that's not going to stop. And so the church did what they could at all points, and you have to make tough decisions. The church made the decision, we're going to watch her like a hawk. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure that the children are safe. We're not going to allow her to hurt anybody, but we're going to minister to her. I know churches that would be like, nope. And I get it. And you have to, as a church, your leadership has to make those tough calls. And hopefully you have the kind of relationships with your churches as a safety team, as a security team, that you can have those, you can make those tough calls, and it can be a community conversation. You know, when I go to my leadership in my church, I'm like, look, this stuff's above my pay grade. You guys have to make the call. And there's times that they make decisions to minister that I honestly, and I'd like to think I have a very ministry-focused heart, where I honestly would be like, nope, you need to find a different place to be. And so that's the thing. And then, so there's patterns of abuse that can be repeated. There's kids that don't understand. And then there's thievery. There's vandalization. There's some kids that they act out. We had a kid that the teacher turned to me and she goes, I am so sorry, because I had just painted that classroom, and she had wanted a very specific color painted in that classroom. And she turned around and this kid was taking his fingernails, and he was literally, and he was hurting himself. This is actually a sign of some trauma that this kid's been through, because it had to hurt to do what he was doing. And he was taking his finger and his fingernail, and he was like the way that a mouse would you see those claw marks into something, and he was like clawing down into the drywall in the wall. And I had to putty fill it and then paint over it, and she had to watch him like a hawk. And we did a lot of ministry with him, and but he was like, what? Like he couldn't comprehend. Like, he was not raised. He'd been hatched. And it's something that we've got to remember, is those kids need love, and we may be the only person that speaks love to them. Because I was like, hey buddy, listen, we love you and we want you here. That's what's most important, but you can't do that. That's a no-no. Oh, okay. Like, he literally, it wasn't that he had some kind of a mental block or a disorder with that. His social skills were extremely lacking, and he might have been the same young man that actually took a swing at one of our elders. And I remember this young man got in a fight on our church bus, and the church bus stopped, and the pastor that was driving it called me. He's like, I need you here now. And I got on and sat with this kid, and the kid ended up really liking me eventually. Like, he would come up and give me, I'd do like side hugs with the kids and stuff, and it was always in a public environment, you know. But he would always come up for a hug, and I got to know him and his little sister. But man, what a mess. I mean, man, what a mess. And he had, I think it was the same kid, he had kind of do the little rat shoe thing into the wall. So vandalization's totally a thing. We had a kid that would try to come back and break into the church at night. I've talked about him several times. There can be very unique concerns with foster children, and so you don't want to be mean towards them, but you know how to minister better if you know the background. So if you can build relationships with the different folks that you are that are in your church body that are fostering or doing adoption. And sometimes there's things where kids are in the system, and because of things their parents have done, there's some very severe developmental disorders. They may have to wear headphones because they have I just totally went blank on what it's called, but certain types of sounds really, really bother them, and they can't hardly handle them. And so we've got probably 3 people out of 1,500 at our church that they will actually wear sound dampening headphones because they have a disorder that's related to that. That's a thing. So the kid may freak out all of a sudden because of these loud noises. Or we had a girl that, she's an adult now, but when she was in her teens and her early childhood, she was severely sexually abused by her blood biological father. I have less than no respect. And there's a really long story that goes with her, but she had come to our church and they were singing the song, "You're a Good, Good Father." And she turned to the lady that was helping her and she's like, "Fathers are awful. Fathers are evil." And because her perspective, her normal is that, which just absolutely breaks my heart, because I had a loving, very gentle father, and man, what a mess. And so there are very messy things that go along with that stuff that happens that is a huge mess. That was me waving at one of my cops. And it's awful. So you can have vandalization, you can have kids trying to break in, you can have kids trying to steal things. And so now imagine that you're trying to create an environment that's safe for something like this, and watch that. And a lot of people feel like in church that they ought to be able to lay their purse down or set down their suit jacket. And some people keep their wallet in their suit jacket. I mean, that's up to you, but I'm not an advocate of creating an opportunity for somebody to be able to steal things. And if you have a kid that is a habitual thief, I mean, to the point of kleptomania, and I've dealt with them. We even dealt with an adult woman that was coming out of a very broken past, and she stole several things from our church, and she was confronted about it. And when she realized all of the emotional pain she caused people, she repented of it and she stopped. It was a mess. And that is reality. It's a very broken world. So all of that stuff happens with foster kids, and finding ways to love them. And then just understanding that because of certain types of abuse, there are certain people that maybe you can't minister to as well. And that's a thing that I've had to accept, and just take it as this is just how this is. As a man, there are women that have been through abuse, girls that have been through abuse, that if they were abused by a man, they will naturally perceive me as a potential victimizer. They will not see me until trust is built, and maybe never will they be able to see me because of moving on to another environment or whatever. It's just awful. And so you may not be able to minister to that person at all. That may be something that you're not able to do even in the slightest. And you may have to let other people do so. So bringing that all the way back around, it could be very extreme. It could be all the way down to extremely mild. And so building relationships through your pastors, getting to know folks who foster in your church. They have special needs and special demands. And sometimes they have very strong security concerns where there's somebody that is an absolute threat to this child. I've talked about it before. It wasn't a foster care situation, but some of these kids come from terrible backgrounds that I honestly cannot comprehend, because I had a much healthier childhood. But I helped a police department help a boy that was 17, that his dad came home from prison. And he tells his dad, he said, "Hey, the whole time that you were gone, my stepmom was cheating on you. She was having affairs on you the entire time you were gone." And the dad beat up the son and threw him out of the house bodily and said, if you ever come back, I'll beat you again. What? Or there's a 13-year-old boy, he's got to be at least 14 now, that I worked with as a chaplain riding along and was able to speak some life into him and visit with him. And I need to follow up with the cop that knows this boy, and he's kind of tried to big brother this kid who is going to be long-term in foster care. He's going to graduate from foster care, or graduate from high school and leave foster care and just be on his own, because his parents said, we don't ever want you back. Wow. You know, a lot of us did not go through those kinds of childhoods, and sometimes they just need that little bit of extra love and prayer and attention. And a lot of these kids, the only attention they ever got was negative, so it's hard for them to process. Like, I know a young man that he was staying with one of his parents, and he commented to a friend of mine and said, it really freaks me out when I stay with this parent and their spouse, because they don't argue and fight and scream at each other and throw things the way that this other parent and their spouse does. That was that child's normal, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking. So it takes extra care, sometimes extra vigilance and opportunities. And I had a lot of kids that would come up to me and give me a fist bump and you know, hey Paul and whatever. And sometimes it just takes that extra little bit of love and attention for that kid. So God bless. If you enjoyed this microsode, check out the video and audio versions of the Let's Talk Church Safety and Security podcast.